Welcome back to Pivot Points. I'm your host, Dave Allen, founder of Brand Pie, the brand consultancy working with businesses to deliver impact at pivotal moments in their journey. Creativity and professionalism are not always polar opposites. Sarah Walker-Smith shows that they're two sides of the same coin. Between musical and acting aspirations and leadership with huge businesses like Shakespeare Martineau and Ampa, she's focused on bringing purpose to her teams and empowering them to be their true selves. Join us on Pivot Points to discover how Sarah overcame impostor syndrome, why you need to go slow to move fast, and her inventive use of a shadow board. Delighted to have Sarah with us today on Pivot Points. Could you just introduce yourself to the listeners, Sarah?
I can, Dave, although actually this is the bit I'm dreading the most. How do you introduce yourself? I am the chief exec of a large national professional services organisation, but I started life as a little girl in a single parent from a council estate in Lincoln. So that's probably the two extremes of me.
Brilliant. And how did you get to the point where you became chief executive, particularly in the legal sector?
It was all a giant accident, if I'm really honest. I could probably sit here and say it was all part of a massive strategic plan, but it's just my life and my career have been a series of giant accidents. How I got that particular job was I had been in my previous job for 15 years. I'd been headhunted. I never used to pick up the phone to headhunters, but they just caught me on a particularly bad moment. And I went through a 6-month process, but I put myself into the process because I thought I might learn something, never thinking in a million years I'd get the job. And at the end of that 6 months, I was the last person standing. So that's how I got the job. But the bigger point, and definitely a pivot point for me, was deciding whether to take it or not. And in terms of deciding whether to take it or not, I had to really search deep about purpose. This was 6 years ago I took this job, and I was in my late 40s at the time. So I had to really think, okay, what am I all about? What is my purpose? What do I want to do? So that was a really big point for me. And when I got the job, having been through this 6-month process, lots of tests, lots of interviews, the very final day in the process was a final presentation to the board, essentially. And at that point, down to about 3 people. And I remember being up half the night before thinking my impostor syndrome had gone berserk, thinking this little girl from a council estate in Lincoln should not be in this position. And I'd done a very chief executive type presentation, whatever one of those is, and I got my black suit ready and I was going to put my hair up, and I just had this epiphany in the middle of the night where I thought, no, that's not who you are. So I wore a red dress, took my hair down, and did only a few slides, mostly of pictures, of which one of them was a picture of a 5-year-old ballerina, and I told an anecdote. And for me, that was absolutely a pivotal moment in my career, because not only did I get the job, but probably more importantly, I got it authentically, which meant I could then show up as me and lead in the way that I'd probably not been able to. If I think about my career up to that point, I'd always been hiding something or stifling something, and I kind of got to show up as me for the first time. So that was a really pivotal point, not getting the job, but deciding to take it.
I mean, that's a lovely story, and that courage to be yourself, it sounds really so simple, but do you feel that, having gone through sort of education and university and your career, most of the time you're guided away from being yourself? You're sort of guided to be something different.
I mean, you say university, I didn't go to university. So yeah, I'm sure we'll probably come back to that, but absolutely. And particularly for most of my career up to that point, I'm certainly not now, but I'd been the youngest person in the room, very often the only woman in the room. I know I've been in the room sometimes as the token woman. I recall a point early on when I qualified as a chartered accountant, which was another giant accident, sitting next to the managing director. I was with a firm called Touche Ross when I qualified, and the then managing partner had 2 of the students sitting either side of him at the dinner when we first all came on board as students, and he would turn to me and chat about the weather or where I was going on holiday, and he would turn to the male student on the other side and ask him about his career prospects. So right from the get-go, I guess I've always felt a bit of an imposter, and like I was having to fight to be seen and heard and taken seriously. So I think what I started to do relatively early on was mask some of that personality in order to be one of the boys.
Yeah. So you went straight from school into Touche Ross and joined their sort of
Not
school
quite.
program.
No.
I know there's something there.
You're going to keep delving, aren't you? I feel where this is going. Okay, so little me as a child, this is going to sound like a sob story, and it really wasn't, but little me was brought up by my mum, who was a single parent, and spent a lot of time from the age of about 10 looking after my sister, who's about 5.5 years younger than me. And I spent, because we didn't have a lot, I think my imagination got carried away. So I used to sit in the cupboard, actually the cupboard above the stairs rather than the cupboard under the stairs, like Harry Potter. I used to write musicals, I used to write plays, and I think I lived my life in this imaginary world. So from a very young age, I wanted to be an actor. And I was unbelievably lucky that I got a place at drama school. I had a Saturday job, I could only afford to audition at 2 places, and I got in at both of them. And I was due to go. And then on my 18th birthday, not my mum's fault at all, but she had a bit of a breakdown and she asked me to leave home. She basically threw me out of home is overly dramatic. She was very calm. She said, you just need to go, and you need to go right now. So I then found myself living in the middle of my A-levels, living in a quite horrible, mouldy bedsit without any heating. And it was pretty grim when I look back on it. I used to keep milk on the windowsill to keep it cool because I didn't have a fridge or a kitchen or anything like that. No heating. It was pretty awful. And at that point, I think, quite frankly, I rethought this whole plan of being an actress, and I just went to the local job centre and said, I need a job. And they were obviously looking alphabetically down the list, and the first thing they saw was accountants. So they sent me off to a little local firm of accountants in Lincoln, a lovely little firm called Wright Bygar and Co. And I spent a few months working for them, and they said, you really do need to think about becoming a chartered accountant. And I was like, well, I don't even know what that is, but okay, I'll give it a shot. So they sent me off to Nottingham Trent Uni, which is another pivotal point in my life and career, actually. We'll come back to Nottingham Trent probably. And while I was there, I got picked up by Touche Ross as part of their trainee graduate program. So then found myself working for one of the big accountants, obviously became Deloitte. So suddenly catapulted from council estate on Lincoln, or mouldy flat in Lincoln city centre, mouldy bedsit rather, into working for one of the large accountancy firms. And I qualified as a chartered accountant from that. So yes, I did qualify quite early. And then from that, I became a manager at PwC. And again, because I'd gone a more direct route, I was one of the youngest managers at PwC. So, absolutely no plan whatsoever. And if you'd asked me when I was a child, was I going to qualify as a chartered accountant, I would have probably rather eaten my left arm, quite frankly. But I did love it. I loved the people side of it. It was such a brilliant grounding, going to see lots of different businesses, understanding their business models, understanding what made them tick. And I learned so much about business as a result of being an auditor, but it was not an aspiration to be an auditor. And I went from there to work at Boots the Chemist. And then from Boots the Chemist, I ended up in another law firm before I came to this one. So like I say, it's been a very weird career, I think.
Well, maybe not. I mean, I've had the privilege of working with a lot of the world's large accounting firms. And the thing that I've worked with them now probably for nearly over 30 years, starting with the guys at Arthur Andersen, who used to be based in Chicago.
Yes.
There was a brand. And the thing that has always surprised me is how these real straight accountants suddenly, 11 o'clock, get the piano out and turn into a rock band. And you realize these are highly creative people.
Yes.
And so, but you went the other way. You're a highly creative person wanting to be an actor.
Went into numbers.
And then,
yeah.
Did you find the two go together, that sort of logic and magic?
No, not for a long time.
Really?
Not for a very long time. I mean, we come back to being yourself. So I told you the story earlier about how I got this job 6 years ago, but it wasn't really till COVID that I fully showed up. So even though I'd shown a lot more of me to get the job, it was during the pandemic that my world of theatre and creativity and my world of work finally collided. Because one of my colleagues at work, a wonderful chap called Andrew, who's the most phenomenal musician and pianist, and he's now helping, he's writing the music for the musicals that I'm writing. So we're collaborating together. He said to me just after lockdown, do you want to sing On My Own from Les Mis? Now, it's a kind of random conversation, but back to your point about immensely high-pressured, talented people. Andrew is an incredible lawyer, one of the best energy lawyers in the UK, and yet he's a concert pianist. He's so talented. So he, sitting at home in his living room, played On My Own. I sang it in my garden shed, and for some random reason, exactly 5 years ago, actually, we put it out to the whole business. That's the first time. And at that point, I'm in my early 50s. That's the first time I've ever let anybody in the business see that level of creativity. And I've never sung at work, really, or promoted the fact that I'd been acting, because I kept my acting career going alongside the business career, but I did keep the two things really separate.
Yeah. And what reaction did you get from your colleagues at work?
Well,
Shock?
So, yes, I think at that point, remember, heightened emotions, some really tough times for everybody. And I think it was a sense of, thank you for just kind of showing up and giving us that level of vulnerability, because obviously I'm singing, if you've heard On My Own from Les Mis, it's quite an emotional song about a girl being by herself. And I was self-isolating at home in my garden shed right the way through COVID. My family were 200 miles away, and not quite, but I didn't see them for months and months and months, nearly 6 months. I was by myself during COVID,
Wow.
which was a very interesting time for me, and definitely another pivotal moment. But the first reaction was, thank you for that vulnerability. By the roll forward to Christmas, and our then chief marketing officer said, "Okay, you'd obviously seen the
I can
fun
see
of
what's
this.
coming.
See where this is going to go." So we ended up being rolled into a studio, still while everybody is distanced, because this was during November when there was the second lockdown, and we ended up doing a version of, in an isolated way, a version of Sam Smith's Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, which we then put out to the firm and the clients and the Lawyer, which is the top UK legal magazine. And we got a phenomenal response from all of that. But roll forward another year, everybody's fed up and bored of hearing us sing. So I think it had its moment. And I think to see the senior partner of a law firm playing the piano and the chief exec singing a song was definitely a novelty, but I think you can push these things too far and it gets a bit self-indulgent. So we've kind of rolled back on all of that. But during the pandemic, I think mostly the response was gratitude and a level of authenticity and vulnerability that they really liked to see, back to making leaders human again, just to see exactly who we were.
Yeah. And so you've got your first job. Was that your first job as a chief exec?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, the job I'd been doing beforehand for 15 years, I had an awful lot of the component parts of being a chief exec, but there was a managing partner in the firm as well. So I was still managing the operations, chairing the operational board. I was running all of the support services like HR, marketing, finance, ops, IT, that kind of thing. And I thought at the time that I was doing the chief exec job, but it's not until you are the chief exec that you really understand what doing the chief exec job is. Because although I was doing an awful lot of the content, I had this ground cover, this kind of umbrella of a managing partner. And ultimately, really, the book lied with him. But this job, the book very much lies with me. And that feels very, very different.
Yeah. No, that moment is quite a life-forming moment. And how did that manifest itself for you? How did that feel for you?
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. In my old job prior to that, being in a professional partnership and one that was relatively traditional, I used to get quite frustrated that every decision had to go through the partnership, or it felt like it, even though we were a large partnership, well over 100 partners in that business, and I've got 140 odd now. It felt very frustrating sometimes that you couldn't just move in a very agile way, and we over consulted and various other things. When I got this job, and the way that our governance is structured is very, very different. Technically, there was a lot more power vested in the CEO than in a traditional managing partner type role. And the weird thing was, because I didn't have to consult, I wanted to. So this is psychology, isn't it? So I spent more time consulting. And in the first few months in the job, I had a pretty good idea what I thought I wanted to do with the business. But rather than putting my foot down to the floor and going, like, come on, then let's do it, I actually became really consultative because I could, because nobody was forcing me to do it. And I also knew that the solution would be better as a result of talking to everybody. And I also knew that as the bus driver for the bus, if you like, there's no point driving it off into the sunset and looking over my shoulder and realizing there's nobody sitting on it. So I really felt the power of engagement and consultation because it was a choice. And so that felt very different. The other thing that felt very different, I'd had the job virtually exactly a year when we went into lockdown, and the weight of that And I would say the weight's never left me. I feel the weight of this job constantly. And that's a feeling I hadn't had before. And it's really hard to describe to somebody who's not in the top job, if you like. You can be in, even being on a board, and I am on boards of other organizations and different things, there is a different weight, as you'll know as well from your business. There's a different weight. You just feel so responsible for the lives of the people and their families and your clients and the future of the business. And, you know that if it goes wrong, it's on you.
Yeah. No, I mean, that personal responsibility of mortgages, families, career development, their lives, it's a huge burden, and people don't understand it until they actually sort of are put into that position.
And I thought I did, I really thought I did. And there's a bit of, humble pie that I have to eat here, because I thought I did and I really didn't.
And it's not just about the job. It's so much about the emotional ownership of everybody in that business. And when you took over as a new CEO, we spend, we do a lot of work with new chief executives. What were the things, you're going through that consultative process, what were the things you wanted to get out of that? And there's a lot of theories about, employees form their views and management teams form their views in about 90 days with a new chief executive. And they've decided whether you're going to work or you're not going to work in a very short period of time. And if they've decided you're not going to work, it's unbelievably difficult to get it back.
Yeah.
So how did you find that formative period?
I'd say that happened on two levels, really. If I think the wider business, at that point, we employed about 800 people. We've got about 1,400 now, but at that point, it was about 800 people and just over maybe 110, 120 partners. I think the experience with the partners was actually different to the rest of the firm. So the experience with the partners was, I think we really had to go through the whole forming, storming, norming, performing type thing. So behind the scenes, we absolutely had to bring everybody together. We had to coalesce around shared values, a shared vision, and what we wanted from the business. And I knew that if I'd walked in on day one and inflicted that, it wouldn't have gone very well. But I also knew that where there was inconsistencies and disagreements, and particularly because of the way our business had been built up to that point, it was lots of smaller firms that had merged and come together, but nobody had tried to glue them together with something that they all believed in. So I also knew that in going through that process, we would lose people who didn't agree with the direction of travel. And that's what happened. And there were some very difficult moments, but we were better for it. We were absolutely better for it in the long term. And I think perhaps, I'm not saying I got it all right, but maybe I won some respect by dealing with some of the challenges and issues head on and doing a lot of that. With the wider business, it was much more enjoyable, if I'm really honest. Not that it wasn't completely enjoyable with the members and partners, but there was some really nitty-gritty stuff we had to get to the heart of about what the owners of this business wanted from the business. With everybody else, it was much easier and much more consultative because they felt overjoyed in being heard and listened to. So we ran lots of workshops. I set up a shadow board. So we asked people to apply to come onto the shadow board so they could be heavily involved in the strategy. And they were an absolute joy, brilliant to work with. And we put them alongside the then management board that we had. And we worked together on equal footing, completely collaboratively to design the future. So that was a real pleasure, actually. And we did some really immersive stuff, like going into the woods for 2 or 3 days and absolutely immersing ourselves so that we could come up with all of that stuff. So that was all pretty good, actually. And it was a real mixed bag. But I think whichever route we took, whether there was a bit more conflict involved or a bit more synergy and visioning involved, we all came out of the other end knowing where we wanted the bus to go. And like I say, some people got off, but they got off respectfully. It wasn't for everybody. When we'd agreed the vision and the values and where we wanted to be, we said, we know this won't be for everybody, but at least we're clear who we are now and what we want. So I found that process massively helpful because we were then instantly thrown into the pandemic. And if we hadn't have done that legwork and that groundwork, and hopefully I built a bit of trust, but importantly, I understood people and the business. I hadn't superficially come in and thought, I know what to do with this. I went under the bonnet to really make sure I understood the business. That groundwork put us in fantastic stead for when COVID hit. And we were able to drive a lot of transformation very quickly because we'd done that foundation. So the phrase that I kind of coined in my own head at that point was go slow to go fast. And that's what it felt like, actually, because we went very fast in 2020, but that build up in 2019 probably felt a bit slow.
And when you were sort of forming the vision and the values, did you do that collaboratively with the partners? Did you involve the employees? How did you get ownership of that thinking? And
lots and lots of workshops. Well, I found my shadow board. So we got this extra group of 20 people that were going to help us from very diverse backgrounds around the business. We took input, obviously, from the membership and the most senior membership quite early on, actually, which is where some of the inconsistencies were starting to come through. We did external research. We did all those good things that you'd expect in terms of understanding the market and understanding where we sat in the market. We asked clients what they thought about us. We ran workshops across all of our offices where everybody from the business could come and contribute. And we took all of that output away for 3 or 4 days with that shadow board and the senior management team. And we went into 3 groups to work over the 3-day period, why, what, and how. So we crafted the why, the what, and the how. And then we looked for the synergies and the interlinking things between them. And then we went back to the full membership, the partnership, in a conference, which lasted a day and a half to kind of share the outputs of that and fine tune it and tweak it. And then we said, right, we've taken 9 months getting this far. Now we know where we're going. If you're on the bus, you're on the bus. And we need you to help. It's not a bus full of passengers. It's a bus full of people who are helping drive it forwards.
Do you believe that process has helped you align, and then everybody's now focused on the external market? You've stopped all of that internal conversation. You've got everybody aligned. The people who don't want to go on the journey have departed elegantly. Is that what happened? You then suddenly like, we are in the market and we are going to get our elbows out and we're going to win.
So it went through stages, and that first 5-year plan, which we've just completed, the first phase I coined as reload the catapult. So I said very clearly, in my opinion, we were going to go backwards to go forwards. So we kind of mapped out what we thought the journey would look like. And the first 2 years, we were deliberately going to go backwards, i.e. the turnover would go down. We were going to have to invest heavily, so the profit would go down, with the return starting to come in that 3rd, 4th and 5th year. There's nobody more nervous than me in that 3rd
I'm going to say that's brave in a partnership.
I know, because to get people, and all credit to them, to get people bought into this journey and feeling that they were willing to let things go backwards in the belief it was going to go forwards. That was a big moment, and all credit to them. They were amazing. They were so supportive and absolutely got behind it. And that's exactly, thank God, that's exactly what happened. So in years 3, 4 and 5, it went forwards again. But there were a couple of pivot points in there. I mean, there was a really big point where we decided to become a group. And at the heart of our group is this idea of unlocking potential for good, which is very closely connected to my personal purpose, which we may or may not come back to as well. But having done that and articulated that, it was quite clear the business structure was not right for what we were trying to do. So again, restructuring a partnership into a group with a holding company and a structure that at that point was pretty unique, certainly in large law firms. There are other law firms that have set themselves up like that and built, but we were like trying to deconstruct something into that. So it's almost the Heston Blumenthal of, business restructuring. So we were taking something that was already together and taking it apart. But the reason for that was we could see that the potential for our brands, and we had quite a few different brands all kind of getting muddled up with the main brand, which was Shakespeare Martineau. So we wanted to liberate them and unlock their potential. So we kind of took them apart, created a holding company and called that holding company something entirely different so that each brand was not synonymous with the holding company. They were equal parts so that they could all start to grow and be liberated. And thank God that's absolutely what's happened. Each one of those brands is growing and thriving. But like any business regeneration, you have to pivot and you have to look at where you are. It doesn't last forever. Hopefully the vision does, and hopefully the values do. But in terms of the strategy and things that are working and things that aren't working, we've had to pivot. And of course, in the sort of world we're in at the moment, we have to pivot again. So we lost a few people who didn't like the idea of a group, not too many. And we've lost a few since then because their aspirations for either their work-life balance in a different way or the profitability they want to earn as a priority, perhaps at a different stage in their career, coming up to retirement, they don't want to be investing for the future. They want to earn more right now. Those are legitimate reasons that people have got off the bus. But there are very few that have got off the bus really because they hate what we're doing. It just wasn't right for them at that point in their life. So, but you go through regeneration. I'd say we're in another phase at the moment as we now start to plot the next trip.
It's exciting. And can I go back to the shadow board? You're the first person I've had on Pivot Points who's had a shadow board. What is it and what does it do? Apart from shadow the board.
Yes. Well, actually, in a weird way, that's what it didn't do. So it's been through several iterations, but we're at one of those points again. We've grown so rapidly in the last 3 years that we have to keep almost resetting and recalibrating ourselves. So we're about to do it again with the shadow board. But ironically, what I want to do is take it back to what it was at the outset, because it worked brilliantly at the outset. So at the outset, I said to anybody of a certain level across the business, you write to me and tell me why you should be on the shadow board. And we got about 60 or 70 applications and we drilled it down to 20. And we brought those people, again, because we asked about, the population that we asked was probably about 150 people. So nearly half of them applied to come on the shadow board, which was brilliant. And in those early days, what we did was we used them as a think tank. We also didn't stifle them. We used them to go out and do research. We used them to go and consult and get more input from more people. But we essentially put them alongside the board to craft the strategy. And then for the rest of that year, as the strategic implementation plans were coming together, we used the shadow board to help design those plans or to critique those plans or challenge us or whatever. So that for that first year and a half, it was very strategic. In the second iteration of the shadow board, because we put people in for 18 months to 2 years and then said we'd run the process again, it became a bit more operational. And that's where it stopped working quite so well, because going to them and consulting with them about how we were going to implement a new IT system or something, it wasn't really getting the best out of them. And if I look back, that first shadow board, a lot of our senior leaders, people who've risen to the top of the business, came through that first shadow board. So it wasn't set up that way, but it became a talent incubator and a way of exposing people to the bigger picture, which you don't often get in a law firm. Sometimes people are very siloed in their own areas. And then it's kind of lost its way a little bit. So I'm about to reset it and recalibrate it back to very similar again, asking the fresh generation of people coming through into middle management, lower senior leadership, who wants to be a part of driving this business forwards as part of a shadow board. And we'll do the same thing again. But the other thing we set up at the same time as it was called Connectors, which was reverse mentoring. So the top 30 or so leaders in our business have a mentor under the age of 30 who's a much earlier stage in their career. So we were also getting input from people at an early stage in their career as well, but through a slightly different mechanism. And what we're about to do is pull all of those connectors together, potentially with a few other people, into an Ampa assembly. So a bit like people's assemblies are being talked a lot about in the political forums, I think an Ampa assembly is a nice way forwards for us as well. Partly because what we're trying to implement is an empowered model with accountability. And that's a really hard thing to do in a group. And we haven't quite got that right yet. So I'm just doing a bit of a reset to see if we can get back to get more input from more people and get this devolution flowing further.
Ampa's the name of the holding company. That's what you called it, wasn't it?
Yes,
and so
it is.
Is the board at the Ampa level and the shadow board at the Ampa level? So it's drawn from all of the operating business.
Yeah, but each of our brands within the group have their own board as well. And some of them do have mini versions of the shadow board, but the shadow boards that mirror the boards in those different brands are exactly what you think. They are shadow boards. So they are kind of having a look at what the board have a look at and giving inputs and thoughts to the board agenda. Whereas the Ampa-wide one is more about the next stage of the journey for the group.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds like you've stumbled or you deliberately sort of created a way to interview and get your next sort of level of emerging leaders.
It's all a giant accident, Dave. Like my whole career, it's just there's something instinctively that makes me or us go, oh, that's a good idea. That feels right. But do you know why it feels right? It's because we're so clear now who we are and what our values are. And I think once you've got that, and for me, I didn't know what mine were and this is another pivot point for me that we've perhaps not delved on yet. When I was in my early to mid 40s, so just over 10 years ago now, I was getting really lost. I'd been in my job at that point as a C-suite person for 10 years. I'd got into the C-suite and the board of a business relatively early. I was just, my kids were starting to grow up. I mean, they weren't that, particularly old. My youngest was still only about 4 and my eldest was about 10. But I was starting to think, what is this all about? And I'm really starting to lose my way a bit. And I went off on a 2-day women's leadership conference. Now, I'm allergic to women's leadership conferences. I don't like segregating the sexes. I kind of like I like people being people and coming together rather than putting people in boxes. But something instinctively drew me into this 2-day conference. And the first day I wasn't getting it. I was like, no. And I'd gone in very clearly with a view about what I wanted to get out of it. And something happened on the second day that I can go into if it helps. But I came out of the other end utterly clear that my purpose was something completely different to what I thought it was on the first day that I went in. And I felt very liberated. And it took me another few months to craft my personal purpose. I sort the wording of it out. But that was pivotal for me. And since I've done that, I think that's probably why now I can trade on my instincts a bit more, because what's happening is I think purpose is like Pilates for the soul, really. It just gives you that backbone that when you've got to make a decision, you've got a reference point and you know why, and it makes decision making so much easier. But as an accountant, somebody with an MBA, chartered director, all of these very technical qualifications, I'm much more instinctive about decision making now than I used to be, because I've got the values and the purpose bit sorted out.
And what was it on the second day that sort of acted as the catalyst, and where did you get to in the end of that sort of thought process?
Yeah, so there was a number of different exercises, but the first one that suddenly, literally got me on a visceral level was we were shown a video from Harvard, some research that had been done about the person you were probably between the age of 6 and 10 is the real you. The person you were before the world got hold of you and you got institutionalized and, all of those other things that tend to box us in. And we did an exercise where we kind of went back and reconnected with that little person that we would have been. And I remember being unbelievably emotionally affected by this. And I suddenly realized the point that you latched onto early on in this interview, which is I was stifling myself. I was trying to be somebody else. I was too worried about whether people liked me or not. I was too worried about what other people thought about me. I was too nervous or scared to show up as I really was in a male environment, in a very professional environment. And I kind of went back to this little girl that sat in the cupboard above the stairs and wrote stories, and that organized the local kids into groups to put plays on, even though we were kind of in quite a deprived area of Lincoln. We were doing all these creative things. And I really tapped back into that. And what the output that came, having been through that process and then really thought about it, was my personal purpose is bravely lighting the path for others to follow. And I've subsequently changed the word follow into shine. So bravely lighting the path for others to shine. So when I came to making a decision about, do I take this massive leap of faith to be the first female non-lawyer chief executive of a top law firm in the UK, that was easy in that respect, because I thought, well, bravely lighting the path for others to shine. Hopefully I won't be the last. Hopefully I can find ways of showing other people who are going into sectors or areas that they feel that they don't belong. There's a way of saying, no, actually you do, and it's okay. And if I can make the legal sector a bit more accessible and show that we can all bring our true, authentic selves and still have a high-performing business and do really, really well and do a bit of good for the planet while we're at it, then why not, really? So that purpose has really guided me. And again, it guides me around business decisions. And I think if I think about it now, if we unpick things, it's probably why instinctively I wanted to get that shadow board together, because I wanted to find the next bunch of people that we could get into the spotlight and let them grow and shine and develop, and in doing so develop our business. So it's innate now, I think, whereas I think early on it probably wasn't, but now it's just kind of, it's like I say, it's the Pilates for the soul. It just strengthens your core, I think, really. And when things get difficult, and things have got difficult at time to time in the last 6 years, I've got quite a high profile now, and what we know about tall poppies, sometimes if you stick your neck out, then you're making yourself a bit of a target. But because I do believe in my values and how business leaders need to contribute and how we need to show up alongside the politicians to fix some of the systematic changes that we have, sometimes I will attract negativity as a result of that. I get called woke all the time, but I'm okay with it because I'm doing something that's in line with my purpose. I can take the flack. I can take the flack as long as it's linked to me doing it for the right reasons and the right motivations.
I mean, if you get somebody who's really struggling or they're in the wrong job, and you take that purpose and that philosophy, and you start to think, okay, well, how can I help that person shine? And you have that conversation with them. I can see how that could be incredibly helpful in dealing with difficult situations, not just I've got the smartest person and I can encourage them. Yeah, because a lot of people do get put into places where they're not at their best. And
absolutely,
if you can help them shine, if you can help them find a new path forward, that they sort of love you forever. And do you use it like that as well?
I do. I'm not saying that everybody who's I really don't think people love me, but that's a whole different story. That's my imposter syndrome that goes berserk, and that little girl is still doubtful about whether she's accepted and belongs. I mean, every time I walk into a large gathering, some of the boards and things that I get involved in now, there's a voice in my head screaming at me, "You don't belong here." But take that to one side, whether people love me or not. I'd like to think over time, even if they don't like perhaps the outcome at the beginning, over time they see the outcome. And without going into too much detail, I can apply that to personal situations as well, where myself and or another person have been in the wrong relationship. I've managed to kind of navigate my way out of relationships and still get on extremely well with the people that I used to be in a relationship with, because hopefully they can see in due course it wasn't right either. But sometimes I've had to be the brave one. But actually, when you look back on it, it wasn't right for anybody. And there's nothing better than I love, of course, seeing the people that are still in our business doing really well. I also love seeing the people that have left our business doing really well, because they may have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the wrong system, the wrong culture. But to see them go and thrive in another culture, I think that's a really good thing. It might sound a bit odd, but I just want people to get a chance to give it their best shot, really.
No, and if they're in your company for a period of time and it helps them find the right pathway for them. And I used to be at WPP, and there were moments where I had to have very difficult conversations with people and let them go. And for several days, I'm sure they hated me and but a year later, I remember getting one from a particular gentleman who I'd had to let go, and he did a complete life change and sort of opened a sandwich bar in Paris, of all things. And, it made him. And he wrote me a note of thank you, sort of, because you try and do it with dignity, you let people go.
Of course.
But it's damn tough.
I mean, it's quite commercial, really, because if people are in, I'm sure, you are the guru on purpose and purposeful business. So I don't I don't want to start quoting things back at you, but some of the work that I think it was Dan Pontefract did, a book called The Purpose Effect in 2014, where there is a Venn diagram between your purpose, the organizational purpose, and the role you're in. And if you are in that sweet spot where all of those three things come together because they align, you're going to be really high performing. But if one of those things is out of kilter, you won't be. So actually, there's a really commercial side to this, which says if you can align your people with feeling that they are totally on purpose, then they're going to do better and be happier. And it's a virtuous circle.
No, I mean, that's a perfect point to, I think, end the podcast on, all the serious part of the podcast, and we can go on to the fun bit now. But I'd love to know a little bit more, because I know you've gone back, or you've still got in your roots, your creative and musical and sort of acting side, and that I hear you write musicals, or I'd love to know a bit more about that, because that's another first on Pivot Points.
So I've always had this in me, back to that little girl who sat in the cupboard writing stuff. And I never thought I could write a musical. Again, I've always wanted to learn a musical instrument. I've sung instinctively, and I've performed in loads and loads of musicals. And I've also directed a number of musicals. So I kind of understand the genre and how they work together. But my dream was to write one. And I wrote one in 2016. I make it sound easy. It was an absolute nightmare. And I attempted to write the music, which in hindsight was really stupid because I'm not musically trained at all. But we did it. I wrote this thing and we produced it. It was bloody tough. But then in 2018, and then I wrote another one. And then in 2018, I was really inspired hearing about the suffragettes. I knew nothing about them. And I see the world in stories. I get very creative. When I hear about history, I want to fill in the gaps. So long story short, I've written the story of 7 different suffragettes, and myself and Andrew, who I mentioned earlier, who is this brilliant musician, he's never written anything in his life before. But with my experience of musical theatre and my storytelling, we've created these stories, written the script, written songs for now 4 musicals about the suffragettes, with 3 more still to go. But what's innovative about them is they're all interconnected. So the same characters appear in all 7 of them. What we're going to do with this, I haven't got a clue. But when I'm not busy doing everything I do, I'll be sitting here at home, writing lyrics to a song, recording the song. And we've recorded all of the songs for all of the musicals with me playing all of the parts, because at the moment we haven't got a cast. So, God knows what my neighbours in this flat think. I mean, at times they'll be hearing me doing 7 different voices and wailing at the top of my voice. So yes, behind the scenes, we've got this whole industry going of writing musicals with no idea why, just for fun.
No, but that's the sort of thing that suddenly it blows up. It gets caught by somebody or spotted by somebody, and the next thing you know, it's in the West End. That would be cool.
But there is something about synchronicity, and this comes back to purpose and values and everything else. As a result, I know we need to dial off, but as a result of being, another pivot point was deciding to move down to London. Massive decision for me, but I just bravely decided. I was pulled down here a couple of years ago. I was feeling absolutely distraught one evening, didn't want to go out, was feeling really lonely, didn't know anybody. And I phoned a friend and he said, look, you've been invited to this thing, get there, go to it. As a result, I met Helen Pankhurst of the Pankhurst, who's now a great friend, and she would love to do something with these musicals at some point. So you never know, but it just shows you again about synchronicity. When you're in the zone and you're kind of on purpose, things start to line up.
That's fantastic. What a way to end. Well, thank you ever so much, Sarah, for spending time on Pivot Points. It's been magic to talk to you. Really enjoyable. Those 40 minutes absolutely flew by.
Thank you.
I'm sure people are going to enjoy listening to this. And thank you again.
Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Pivot Points. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more fascinating conversations with industry leaders in our previous episodes. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to know more about Brampai and how we deliver impact in the pivotal moments that matter to you, head over to brampai.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.